Hi, everybody. Here today, I want to share some thoughts with you on who's in your circle. Who's in your circle? Bedros Keuilian shares a story. It was a midsummer's evening, and the sun was still hours away from its midnight sunset. While taking a walk along the shoreline in this particular resort in Alaska, I noticed several crab fishermen casting their nets, waiting a few moments and pulling out a couple crabs at a time. One fisherman, you see, had a bucket full of 5 or 6 crabs in it. It looked like a run-of-the-mill 5-gallon paint bucket that you'd find at your local Home Depot. There were several inches of water at the bottom of the bucket of these crabs, some of the size of my palm and others the size of my hand. So the crabs were different sizes. As I stood there watching how this crab fisherman went about his trade, I noticed that one of his crabs from the bucket was climbing over the top of the rest. It was making a break for freedom, and I silently cheered it on. I could tell it was the most ambitious crab of the bunch. Somewhat awkwardly, you see, it would step from crab to crab, getting higher and higher, and eventually was able to extend its front legs right up to the lip of the bucket. He was just inches away from escaping the paint bucket prison. Recognizing that the fisherman likely depended on this crab for his meal ticket, I alerted him that the Steve McQueen of the crab world was about to make his great escape. He nodded knowingly and said, with a little condensation here, maybe, for a naive landlubber like myself, you just watch what happens. As this ambitious crab started pulling itself up to get over the edge of the bucket, all of the other crabs reached up, grabbed its hind legs, and pulled him down to the bottom of the bucket. Minutes later, the same scene repeated itself. I was in awe, but also aware that I just learned a valuable life lesson. I wonder how many of us have been around people that try to pull us back down when we're just about to reach the top. In the book of John, in the New Testament of the Bible, a paraphrase of the story says this: one of the disciples, Thomas, who his nickname was the twin, was not there at the time with the others. This is after Jesus died on the cross and rose again from the dead. But they kept telling him, "We have seen the Lord." He replied, quote, "I won't believe it unless I see the nail wounds in his hands and put my finger into them and place my hand into his side." 8 days later, the disciples were together again, and this time Thomas was with them. The doors were locked, but suddenly, as before, Jesus was standing among them and greeted them. Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger in my hands. Put your hand into my side. Don't be faithless any longer. Believe." Thomas said, "My Lord and my God." Then Jesus told him, "You believe because you've seen me, but blessed are those who haven't seen me and believed anyway." Sometimes you and I are tempted not to believe what we need to be believing. This apostle Thomas traveled with Jesus all the time and for about 3 years, and he understood what Jesus was all about. He understood what his capacity was, what his capabilities were, and yet he still doubted what all his friends and peers were telling him. Lisa Hickman writes, after 8 days, the text says, Christ appeared to Thomas. This is eight days after Jesus rose from the dead. References of the Old Testament encourage us to consider the divine blessing and commissioning that occur on this eighth day. But did you think that maybe Thomas didn't believe the whole story that Jesus was trying to tell for 3 years prior? Maybe sometimes he was there for an ulterior purpose, maybe. Thomas was passionate about his dedication to Jesus after he saw the results. I think you and I sometimes are tempted to believe when we see instead of believing before we see. In fact, there was a time in John chapter 11 when, before Jesus died, Thomas was so adamant about Jesus that he said, quote, he says, "Let us also go and we'll even die with Jesus." So what happened between the time that he was adamant about Jesus and then the time that he decided to, I'm not going to believe unless I see? Could Thomas have doubted the storytellers? I think so. I think that some people, maybe you and I, have to see something in order to believe it, because maybe some of the people in our lives maybe weren't telling the truth in the past, and it's hard to believe people that haven't been telling the truth. Then we read through Scripture that there were 12 men that followed Jesus and were able to learn from him and get coached by him. And if you look at Peter, Mary Fairchild shares that if you look at Peter, one minute he was walking by faith, and the next minute he was sinking, literally. He was impulsive. He was emotional. But yet Jesus thought that he had a seed of character in him that can be molded and developed. And then you look at Andrew, another follower of Jesus. This Andrew guy, he wasn't so stable in the beginning, but Jesus still saw potential in him. Today I'm talking about who's in your circle. It's really important for you and I to design our circle in a way that the people in our lives are going to help us get to a place where we really need to get to, and maybe help those people get to the same place or to the place that they're trying to get to. If you look at Matthew in the New Testament, Matthew was another follower of Jesus. He was hated among his peers because let's just call him, he was unethical in the beginning. He would take extra money from the people of the town because he was in charge of collecting taxes. So if the tax was, in nowadays terms, $5, he would charge $7 and keep the extra $2 and pocket that. So he was not very ethical, but Jesus saw a seed in him that maybe he could mold, that he could share. And then he chose another guy, a guy named Simon. And Simon was radical. I mean, he was out there. What did Jesus see in this guy, Simon? I think sometimes you and I maybe see the negatives in people and maybe lack the ability to see the potential in people if they have a seed of integrity in them. So if you think about other people in your life, that they make decisions based on the people around them, based on their peers. They tend to move along with the crowd instead of standing their ground for what's right. There's a story that a young lady named Kate wrote. I went to my first Yankees-Red Sox baseball game a few years ago. I was at Fenway Park in Boston, and although a diehard fan of the Anaheim Angels, I felt compelled to root for the home team, the Red Sox. 2 seats sat empty next to me until 2 gentlemen, one black and one white, asked if they could sit there. The first fan, a black man who looked to be in his 50s, was wearing a Yankees hat. I teased him and told him he could if he rooted for Boston, and he chuckled and continued to walk past me and sit. And after a while, I asked him, how could you possibly root for the Yankees when you live in Boston? He said with a South African accent, I lived in South Africa years ago when apartheid was at its peak and violence towards blacks was unbearable, so I decided to move my family to the United States and start a new life. New York was our first home, and one day I decided to buy a ticket to a Yankees game, and as I sat in the stadium, I could not believe that the white people I was surrounded by did not care about the fact that I was black. It was the first time in my life I didn't feel threatened or defensive or scared by them. They didn't care about the color of my skin, only that I rooted for the Yankees. Wow, it almost made me a Yankees fan too, but almost. You see, you and I have the power to make people in your life welcome or not only by your actions, but also by your words. I think you and I need to really think twice about what comes out of our mouth, because sometimes what comes out of our mouth doesn't go by the brain first, and we sound stupid and we say things that we ought not say. Jesus had the amazing ability to make people feel welcome when they were around him. If you think about that culture, the religious people of that culture did not hang around the regular people, because in their minds, they were too holy for that. They were too pure to hang out with regular folk like you and I. But Jesus purposely created an environment in his life where he chose to hang around and invest time with people that were maybe not like him. In fact, most of the people that he chose to hang around were not like him at all. But he was able to impact the people in a way that was dramatic. Jesus understood how critical it is to have the right people around you. And I just shared with you moments ago that Jesus chose people that weren't all that stable in the beginning, but over time he was able to mold them and shape them to give them a backbone that they didn't have in the beginning. You see, Jesus chose an interesting group of men to be his followers who really in time helped change the entire world, because now I'm still talking about these guys 2,000 plus years later. So something must have worked. These guys, they didn't get Jesus or understand Jesus maybe in the beginning. And in fact, two of them said that they want, when Jesus became at least into his kingdom, that's another long story behind that concept. But they didn't really care about the price that Jesus had to pay to get where he had to go. He wanted to go. They wanted to take the shortcuts and not pay the price. So in Mark 10 in the Bible, it says, when they were on the road going up to Jerusalem, and Jesus was walking on ahead of them, and they were amazed that those who followed were fearful. And he again took the 12 aside and began to tell them what was going to happen to him. In verse 33, it says, behold, we're going up to Jerusalem, and Jesus will be delivered to the chief priests, the religious folks, mind you. Jesus, Christ, was going to be delivered to the religious group, the Jewish culture of the time, and they'll condemn Jesus to death. And they were then handed over to the Gentiles, or the non-Jewish people, and they were going to kill Jesus, but Jesus was going to rise again on the third day. Now, Jesus was very clear what was going to happen. He knew why he was born. He knew what the role was that he had to do. But then two of these guys in verse number 37, and they asked this. They just heard moments earlier say that Jesus is going to be killed in a very horrific way. But their response was this in verse 37. They said to him, grant that we may sit one on your right and one on your left in your glory. That is, when you come into your kingdom, when you become king, if you will, in quotes. They just missed what he just said. He's going to be delivered into this situation where he's going to die. They didn't hear that. All they wanted was, I want to be on one side of you, I don't want to be on the other side of you. Talk about not paying attention to what's going on around you. So then they decided to focus on what was in it for them. How many times haven't you been in conversations with people who ignored the details about what you were trying to say, except what was in it, what's in it for me? And once that is expressed, then you know really what the priority is to the people in your circle. If people who are in your circle are about lifting you up and you lifting them up, you have a good team around you. But if it's all about me and all about them, something's got to change. Dudley Jennison writes, sometime when you're feeling important, sometimes when your ego's way up, sometime when you take it for granted that you're the prize-winning pup, sometimes when you feel that your absence would leave an unfillable hole, just follow these simple instructions and see how it humbles your soul. Take a bucket and fill it with water. Put your hand in it up to your wrist, and now pull it out fast, and the hole that remains is the measure of how you'll be missed. You may splash all you wish as you enter and stir up the water galore, but stop and you'll find in a minute it's back where it was before. How many people have you met in your life who think they are all that? Some people think that the world revolves around them. Well, if you've been around the barn a few years, you realize that you're just a speck in the universe, really. I'm just a speck in the universe. But we're here to make a difference in a way that only you and I can make a difference. Rick Warren writes, everyone eventually surrenders to something or someone. If not to God, you will surrender to the opinions or expectations of others, to money, to resentment or fear, or to your own pride or your own lusts, or, ouch, even your own ego. You were designed to worship God, and if you fail to worship Him, then you will create other things to give your life to. You are free to choose what you surrender to, but you are not free from the consequences of those choices. You see, you can't always accurately judge someone's future by their past. Again, you can't always judge someone's future by what happened yesterday, but it is a good predictor of what can happen in the future by what happened in the past. Forbes magazine had an article by Clint Stindl. He says, one of the most important decisions we can make in life is who we choose to be around. Again, one of the most important decisions we make in life is who we choose to be around. In fact, there's an old proverb that reads, "Show me your friends, and I'll tell you who you are." Quite often, we become like the people we're around. Based on that, we must be cautious about whom we surround ourselves with because of the short and long-term implications. He says to analyze your crew. We lean on our friends a lot. We share our successes and challenges with them. It's important that these people be the ones who support and encourage us. We must find a support system of friends who will support and challenge us. He kind of ends, he says, do an analysis of the circle of people in your life and see whether they add to your life or take away from it. Surround yourself with people who will help you reach your goals. Again, the text today is, who's in your circle? Over the years, I've had to decide to be more choosy, be more particular about the people that I have in my life. And I think let me just complete that thought, because sometimes the wrong people in your life are people that can literally handicap you in a way that can set you back years and years and years because they don't know where they're going in life. So they feed your mind with all kind of thoughts and doubt that then in time slows you or stops you from moving forward in your life. So it's really important for you and I. In fact, the New Testament says this in a paraphrase. It says, Paul makes it clear that you need to be careful who you choose to hang around. So he says this, "And why do you think I keep risking my neck in this dangerous work?" This paraphrase says of what St. Paul said. "I look death in the face practically every day I live. Do you think I do this if I wasn't convinced of your resurrection and mine guaranteed?" That is, that he knew where his faith was. "And do you think that I was just trying to act heroic when I fought wild beasts and at Ephesus?" And he says, but there's no way to really judge that. He says this. He says at the end, "Bad company ruins good manners." Again, bad company ruins good manners. How many times have you been around children who had mouths of sailors? I mean, the languages that just came out of these kids. Well, where do you think they learned it? I'm sure you've met children who were racists. They didn't like black people or they didn't like white people. Well, where do you think that was learned? It was learned from the people in their circle. So I think you and I have to understand that we are more in control of who is in our circle than we think we are. So who you have in your circle will determine how far you go in life. Who you have around you every single day will determine how far you go in life. So if you think about the people that are maybe in your workplace, maybe cousins and uncles and aunts that maybe haven't really gotten so far in life, I wonder how many of you and I tend to maybe want to hang around the people that are, I'll try to be polite, that are fun instead of people that are really going places in life. So there's all kinds of examples in the Bible and in life about how teamwork can literally change the way you run your life. And again, teamwork is designed. How many times haven't you met people or know of people, heard stories about sports teams, that they're very particular who they want on the team, because the people that they choose to be on the team can either take them to a championship or they can not take them to the championship. I mean, we've seen over the years baseball teams that, came from nothing. They hadn't won a championship in decades after decade after decade. They could not win a championship. And then they got the right people in the right places and the right leadership on the team. Then they were able to go very far because they purposely designed a team that was heading in the same direction. I think you and I are just like sports teams. If we want to get someplace quickly or more quickly, then we need to be adamant about the people in our lives. Martin Luther King Jr. said this: everybody can be great because anybody can serve. He says you don't have to have a college degree to serve. You don't have to make your subject and verb agree to serve. You only need a heart full of grace, a soul generated by love. He also said the first question which the priest and the Levite was asked, let me back up on the story. In the New Testament, there was a guy that was robbed. He was left for dead. And 3 religious people went by and ignored him. You would think that the religious people or the religious culture would be the first to stop and help somebody that was hurting. Well, that didn't happen. So a non-religious guy, a guy that didn't profess to have any sort of religious teaching, was the one who stopped to make a difference in this man's life. So Martin Luther King paraphrased this. He says that the first question which the priest and the Levite, the other religious guy, was asked, if I stop to help this man, what will happen to me? But the Good Samaritan, the guy who helped the guy that was robbed and almost killed, reversed the question, if I do not stop to help this man, what will happen to him? I think when you and I focus more on the people who need us in our lives, and you don't have to have all the knowledge in the world to be helpful to people. You just have to have, like Martin Luther King said, a heart to serve, a heart to make a difference in people's lives, and leverage your pain, leverage your experience, and leverage your knowledge for the benefit of other people. Who you have in your circle can mean life or death. Let me share a story. In 2009, a skydiver in Texas named Dave was in the middle of a 13,000 feet high tandem jump with somebody named Shirley, a grandmother who was a first-time diver. And when he discovered that neither of his 2 parachutes would open all the way to stop their free fall, that's a bad day. Red alerts screamed through his brain as he struggled to untangle the parachute lines, and they fell thousands of feet, then a few thousand more within seconds left to go before impact. This teacher, opted to use control toggles to rotate his body to cushion the newbie, the new person, the senior citizen, absorbing the brunt of the force when the 2 of them hit the ground. The teacher, the instructor, the skydiver, quickly thinking, because he had done this before, he had, skydived many, many times, saved this woman's life. While she sustained some injuries, she recovered and is able to function normally, but the teacher paid a monumental price. The fall paralyzed him from the neck down, most likely permanently, and he now needs help to do the most basic things like getting dressed or even taking a bath. The teacher, who has kept in touch with the student since the accident, sometimes tears up when the student thinks about the sacrifice that her instructor made for him, saying, quote, how can somebody have that much love for another person? How many times haven't you had the opportunity to make a difference in somebody's life, but because of maybe what they look like, or maybe where they come from, or maybe sometimes your prejudice against them determines how maybe you view them? Instead of viewing them with a heart of love, you maybe view them with a heart of being judgmental. I think you and I have an opportunity many, many times to make a difference in people's lives that maybe we wouldn't consider. However, if you and I choose to keep people in our lives around us who make a difference in other people's lives, you're going to get caught up in that wave, in that rush of the joy that it gives you and I when we just make a little dent in somebody's life or a little push or a little pull that can help them reach things in their life that they couldn't have achieved without you or without me. You and I have an opportunity every day to think about who's in your circle, because frankly, sometimes you and I have to fire some people in our circle. Think about that. I've had relatives that I've had to fire. I'd have to separate myself from because of their negativity, because they were choosing to have an attitude that was dragging other people down. And then in addition to that, you have to think about who's in your inner circle, not only just in your bigger circle, but then who's the closest to you. Because the people that are closest to you can push you forward, or they can absolutely stop you in your tracks. What unique contribution are you giving to the people in your life? Think about that for just a minute. What unique contribution are you giving to people in your life? And finally, who needs to be in your circle, who is not? Now, that doesn't necessarily mean human beings as in flesh and blood, but it can be their books. It can be their articles. It can be their words. It can be learning from their experiences. You can bring those people into your circle, which can make your circle much, much stronger. So as I close here today, you and I have more in control of who remains in your circle than you think. So just take some time. Just invest some time to evaluate who is helping you move up and who's dragging you down. Because you are in control every single day of who is in your circle. My name is John Carver, and I thank you for watching.